Hello and welcome to the Corporate Research Forum webinar, Leadership Development, Is It Fit for Purpose? Welcome to all of you who are online. Glad that you could join us today. Here in the studio with me, I've got our three panellists, Ben Chambers, who's the Global Leadership Development Director for GSK, David Young, who is Group Head of Leadership Development for BT, and Dr. Eve Poole, who's an Associate Faculty Member at Ashridge Business School. So welcome to them and welcome to you. We'd like to get things going. As you know, for those of you who've been involved in our webinars before, we like them to be interactive. So you have a number of ways of interacting with us. We're live on Twitter at the hashtag CRF Leadership, and also you can make contribution directly onto the website. We will also be posting some polls, and we're going to post the first poll now, which we're going to ask you to respond to. So do you think your organisation's leadership development programmes are effective in delivering what your business will require of leaders over the next 5 years? And you've got the option there of saying yes, no, or unsure. So we'll let you think about that while I say a bit more about why we're running this webinar. So this webinar is part of a journey that Corporate Research Forum started back in March, looking at the whole issue of leadership. And we kicked off with a breakfast meeting where we had over 30 organisations and the senior leadership practitioners from those organisations talking about what are the current issues with leadership. So not just in terms of leadership development, but also definitions, where are the opportunities for improvement. And what we found coming out of that conversation, which is informing the research that we've got going on, is that we need to be really clear about what are we doing with leadership development and what its links are to the business strategy. So what are the outcomes we're looking for? And what we also discovered was that there was relatively little evaluation of whether the investment that was being made was making a difference in practice. So that's what we want to build on in the webinar today. Recently, we also held our international conference where, again, we picked up this theme. There were over 300 participants there who were really looking and exploring the difference between directing, managing and leading. So we'll also be picking up some of those themes. And going on from this webinar today, we'll actually be starting the research, and there'll be another event coming up in 2015 where we'll pull together all the different strands of the various conversations that we've been having. So let's see if we've got any poll results up yet, because if not, then we'll turn to the speakers here in the room and the panellists. And what I'm curious about is, in deciding for you, where you make your investments and which leaders that you actually are developing, where are you actually focusing your efforts? So Ben, if I could start with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in terms of deciding where we focus our efforts, there's obviously the traditional budget setting process, which everybody, I imagine, is going through at the moment. So we kind of put our hands in various pockets and say, can we have some cash for next year? We then have the money there for us. But then obviously we've got a governance board. So we have our talent leadership board who we have to go to. And each of our business units is represented on that governance board. And so we almost pitch for the permission to go and work on certain projects. So it's really good to have that governance board in place, which kind of gives us teeth. To then go to the bits of the business and say, this is what we have agreed collectively, so therefore we're going to go ahead and pursue these different agendas that we've proposed to you. So we kind of go through that process in terms of making the decision. In terms of actually how do we spend our money, we've got kind of two things in place. One is kind of the foundation. So we make sure that each leader has the skills required to do their job effectively. So we've got a sort of set of leadership profiles. We know what each leader at different stages in their organisation, their career, is required to do, and we have a series of programs that support that skill development. We also have talent programs which are designed to accelerate specific populations through the organisation. So it's kind of that dual approach, one of kind of foundation skills, one of what talent populations do we have gaps in based on our talent planning process, and therefore how do we accelerate that through the organisation to meet those requirements.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm just noticing that the poll response has come up while you were talking, Ben, and so in line with actually our conversations back earlier in the year, the majority of you are actually saying that you're not sure that what you're currently doing is going to be future-proofing your business. And so in terms of, is it actually delivering what you need? So I'm just going to turn to David, picking up on what Ben's just said about what they're doing in BT. Where are you focusing your efforts, and how are you future-proofing what you're doing?
So if I had to answer the poll question 5 years ago, I would have said no. And today I would say absolutely yes. And what's got us to there is in the answer to this question around where do we focus. 3 years ago, we chose to go on a transformation journey where we said that leadership would be the one thing we were known for as a business. And if you listen to the press over the last few days, I think you'll see the success of our play in the leadership space. So how have we gone about that? I went to the board with my team a few years back, and we said, let's shift from command and control and authoritative leadership, get behind the strategy to change, to show the market that we can shake it up. They agreed to do that, and they said, bring us the world's best thinking, make it happen across all areas of leadership. And so we did that. The executive committee of the board said, we will go first. And so we took them on the journey first. And Karen, I know you know Bob Keegan. We brought him across from Harvard. He helped us. He's one of the world's leading thinkers on leadership. And given I had the board's attention, I was able to work with them. We then, in parallel, took the top 600 on the same journey the board had been through. At the same time, 8,000 of our first-line leaders. And then the year in between, we are now taking our middle managers through it. We found 700 of our middle managers actually managed 50% of the business. So we could focus on those numbers and create the shift that we've created. And I think the way the market views BT has changed, and that's one of our measures of success, but also the way staff feel about BT and the way they're seeing leaders show up. They tell us they're seeing a difference. And indeed, when we talk about measures later, I can share with you how we're proving that.
Okay. And I'm just interested, so what you're saying is, just listen to both of you, there's got to be buy-in from the business.
Yeah.
You're saying, David, very much starting with the top, so there's some role modelling going on for you in that, but also we've got a question also in terms of who's on your governance board, Ben, in terms of, is that business, is that HR, is it L&D, who are the stakeholders?
So it's HR, but it's senior HR who've got the ear of the business.
Yeah.
So it's a cross business unit, every business unit is represented to ensure that if a decision is made, it's got the kind of the buy-in from everybody who needs to provide that permission, and therefore we can go ahead and implement it.
Yeah, okay. And for both of you, I'm also hearing is it's important that it's tied to the business outcomes in both of your business. So you were saying, there was a decision to shift in the marketplace, and that's been one of your measurements. So how do you tie the leadership development into that business strategy?
So we were really clear we'd tie it in by using people's personal objectives. Okay. And so we've been able to measure a change. People say you can't measure the outcome of leadership development, and I say, well, we took the top 600, we had a control group of 1,400, and when I look at their bonus scorecards before and after, the control group didn't change, but the group that went through the leadership development, there was a 6% increase in how their managers said they were performing. Okay. So we've also got softer kind of our staff survey metrics as well that actually measure how they're doing it as well. And the difference between trained and untrained for us is dramatic. And for me, that proves that if you get leadership training right and you reinforce it in the right way, it makes all the difference to the business. And it's one of the things that's put us in the place we're in today. Okay,
great. Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Eve, from your experience, I know you work across a range of organisations. Listening to what you're hearing from Ben and David, what would your observation be?
Well, I think I see it as a direction of travel that's sort of three phases. I think about 10 years ago when leadership development was a new thing, it was all about just the most senior people in the organisation. So you did management development until you got grown up, and then you went on a leadership course as a sort of reward. And then when there was lots of money sloshing around and people were very giddy about leadership, pretty much everyone went on leadership development training. So it was fairly scattergun. People weren't particularly bothered about outcomes. It was really about sort of retention and getting the word leadership in the currency of organisations. So I think what I'm seeing at the moment is a wee bit retrograde in that it is rather going back to it being about senior people, but that is more of an informed decision rather than an accidental one these days, which is just about spend and ROI. So whereas in the past you used to have a lot of rite of passage leadership development programs when you had a whole grade of people stepping up to more challenging roles, and then they would all go on some kind of sheep dip kind of grade step up a program. Nowadays it is all about either your succession gang or your talent gang, and then if you have particular leaders in transition, you'll tend to sort them out through coaching rather than necessarily big leadership development interventions. So that's what I'm seeing in terms of trends in the market at the moment.
Okay. So in terms of, and we'll come on to looking at what's working and what's not working in a second, but I just want to check that I've understood. So we're also differentiating between development, where what you're saying is people are being sent off the job, if you like, versus other interventions in terms of coaching and on the job and using more of that as part of the leadership development. Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing from all of you is that the interventions are at all levels of the organisation. Yes?
Yeah. We recognise that leadership is a skill set, and that skill set differs as you progress through the organisation. So rather than do a sheep dip of here's a set of behaviours that everybody needs throughout the whole organisation, that we do have that, but that's cascaded at each level in the way that suits that level. It's not kind of a blanket programme that goes top to bottom. Yeah. It's recognising different leadership requirements are required by different populations of the organisation.
Okay. And in response to the change in marketplace and how your business is evolving, how does that then show up in what you're doing with your leaders?
So the other thing is going back to the question, it's an interesting one, is one thing we've done is recognise you can't necessarily forecast where the organisation is going to be going in maybe 5 years' time, but we do know kind of roughly what skills the leaders are going to need to be able to achieve whatever that strategy is. So we've created a set of GSK expectations which define what is required of leaders at GSK, and our assumption is, based on the research we've done, is that if the leaders have those skills, they'll be agile enough to morph into the kind of leader they need to be to meet the strategic requirements, whatever those requirements might be. So that's kind of the approach we're taking.
Okay. And one of the first things we did was develop our leadership capability framework and set the standard and set the bar, and then we put in place the training that supported that. So we were really clear on what we wanted for people, and we were really clear on where we wanted to get to.
Okay, so that was something that came up at the leadership breakfast back in March as well, which is, unless you're very clear about what's your definition, what is it that you're actually developing? So what I'm hearing is there's quite a lot of energy being in your organisations into getting really clear about what do we mean by leadership here in our organisation. Yeah. Okay, what I'd like to do is to move on to exploring in a bit more detail, you're both of your organisations, from your experience, Eve, that, a lot of time, energy and effort is put into leadership development. And from your point of view, what have you noticed is working really well for you? And where would you, say, the results are still out and you want to, areas that you could still improve on. So if I'll ask you first, David.
Sure. So what's working really well for us is alignment to the business strategy. It's where we started, and I don't believe we would have the changes we've had in leadership capability if the executive committee of the board hadn't got behind it and said, this is what we're driving for, how do we make it happen? So that's worked really well. I also think their challenge to us of bring the world's best thinking to BT, and setting that standard made a huge difference. So we went to Harvard, we went to Oxford, and we went to McKinsey, and we have taken the best minds there and customised their work for us. So if I think what's been one of the best things was working with Bob Keegan, who's at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we took his tool on immunity to change, and we have put it through all levels in our business. So all of our leaders have access to immunity to change now. That's 90,000 people across the world. And Bob's never had anyone implement it like this. And it's bringing mindset and personal change at a profound level for us.
I'm presuming that you're not doing that face-to-face, or am I wrong?
No, we actually commissioned a movie. So we have a 70-minute Bob Keegan movie now that we let people use, and they sit down in pairs, they work through the immunity to change process, and they're supported in a kind of coaching pair process. So once you've paid the initial cost of the development, there's no further cost to doing it. But with our senior leaders, we'll still bring Bob or one of his associates over. So world-class thinking, and then within that, aha moments for all. So consistently people are seeing themselves in new ways, and they keep saying, if only I'd known this 30 years ago. And so the quality of that the world-class thinking has led to these aha moments. That's working well. What I need to improve, stickiness of it. So when we measured it initially, we had 99.9% of people leaving our training going, wow. 6 months later, 50% were still saying wow. So how do we capture that drop-off? And so we've had to look again at making it sticky and embedding, and we're working again with Harvard on how we make that happen. And the two other things I'd say on improving were around the pace of developing our internal coaches, because we decided in order to shift our leadership, we had to build internal coaching capability. Didn't do that quick enough. And also building our internal faculty. So we might have bought some of the best of the world's thinkers, but to roll this out on scale at a price we can afford, had to build and grow in our senior leaders the ability to teach what they'd learn, and I would do both those things faster.
Okay, and that I just noticed that Adam from Boots has just asked, how do we get leaders engaged in their own development, which is what you're speaking to there. So I'm also wondering for you, Ben, in terms of the work that you've been doing, what have you noticed has worked particularly well, and where have you been able to get the stickiness that David was talking about?
So it's very similar, so I won't repeat all of it. I'll try and take it a level down in terms of actual sort of programme effectiveness in terms of what we do. But some of the big leadership programmes we roll out, key is strategic link. We've dressed them up as business OD interventions rather than being sort of leadership programmes. They're kind of owned by the business. For example, our middle manager programme, we've done it in a big way. We've rolled out to sort of 500-600 people at a time in big groups, take over hotels in Florida and various places. And the president comes along and launches their strategy. So you turn a 3-day middle manager programme into a 5-day OD intervention. So it's very much a kind of a business set agenda, and that gives it an awful lot more traction. People still talk about it. Therefore, that gives us permission to have a partnership with delivery. So the business partner with an external provider we use to co-deliver the programmes, which again gives it much more credibility.
So if I came along to one of those as a participant, I would have an experience of feeling like that's very much part of my day job. My boss's boss is there, and this is about how am I more effective in delivering what I need to deliver.
Yeah,
now
everybody from president down to you would be going through that, and if you're senior enough, your staff will be going through it with you. So it's kind of an immersive experience, which is like I said, it's a president launching a strategy rather than an HR leadership program. So that works really well. And then for people, when you don't have the luxury of bringing people together in big groups, we've made sure that leaders attend together. So we've made sure that you don't go in as an N of one to a training program. You make sure you've got sort of 3 or 4 people from your team around you, so that you can kind of go back and you can support each other with the concepts and principles. So that's sort of stuff that works well from, I guess, a level down from what you were talking about, David. In terms of what I'm still struggling with, which is related to one of the questions up there, is around... I still think leaders see development and their day job as mutually exclusive. They still haven't got the concept that actually you have the potential to learn something from your day job. They kind of go to training programs to be developed, and then they go to their job to work. I'm trying to kind of close that barrier, or close that gap.
Okay. Well, I'll turn over to Eve then to perhaps respond to that. But also, I just noticed Nick's asked a question also about in terms of the applicability when we're outside of an Anglo-Saxon mindset, so also leadership development in diverse situations, but also more sort of off the job as well. So from your research that you've been doing, are there any approaches that have been found to be particularly effective in that sort of transfer of learning that Ben's talking about there?
I think those are 2 answers, really. There's a very specific finding about return on investment and the role of the line manager, particularly because of this thing, been in a course, and it was all a bit secret. No, I haven't, I was just on holiday. I think organisations are realising that's a bit silly and a waste of money. So as soon as an organisation locks in, to objective setting, conversations, all that kind of thing, then at least there has to be at least one conversation about how does what I've just done, wherever I did it, relate to actually what I do every day. So that's a key thing which we're seeing organisations responding to, but slowly, to be fair. The other thing would be some research we've done on stickiness and on how you accelerate and deepen learning. And that was some research we did based on some work we'd done at Harvard, but also based on a partnership with Reading University with the neurobiology team there, which was this wiring up heart monitors and simulations and things, which established that if you really want to get deeply effective learning, which can be utilised not only in times of great joy in organisations, but also in times of pressure and stress, then increased heart rate, equals increased learning. So that was sort of death to the happy sheet culture, which is quite tricky and is still being worked through, and a major challenge to received thinking about what learning and development is. So much more of a focus now on meta abilities, meta competencies, which are therefore much more transferable globally, because they're not about content, which could be very different depending on where you are. It's much more about versatility, resilience, ability to adapt, uncertainty, complexity, all those kinds of things.
So more core human characteristics
Absolutely.
that transcend
Yeah.
nationality.
So
as
I now
opposed
talk
to-
much more about leader-smithing than leadership, and it's all about, if your role is to be a leader-smith on the job, how do you architect your own apprentice pieces so that everything you do in your job becomes learning. And if you need to accelerate deep in that, you can get help from experts like Ashridge. But an awful lot of it is trying to give that role back to you as a leader on the job and your line manager in support.
Okay. Well, we'll come on to talk a bit more about that, and I'm particularly interested in, Ben, being in 90 countries, you've probably got a view on that as well. But I just want to go back to our participants who were online and get them to complete a poll for us. So you'll notice coming up on your screens is that we'd be really curious to know, just listening to the conversation here, but your experience is, in your organisation, do you have a robust process for evaluating whether participants in leadership development programmes have any impact on their actual performance of leaders? So it's all very well, but does it actually show up, and does that make a difference in terms of the actual performance both of leaders? But I would also say I've noticed a few questions coming up from participants here about teams, but also parts of the organisation. So again, interesting to hear yes, no, or unsure on that one. So while people are responding to that, Ben, from your point of view in terms of working globally, working internationally, anything that you...
Yeah, the culture thing's an interesting one. I'll speak to you about it in a couple of weeks, Nick, when we catch up. But for us, it's a fairly simple answer. One is, from a program point of view, you've just got to get around the world and you've got to roll those programs out and test them in markets where they're going to be delivered and make sure they work. So I've spent a lot of time on planes to India and Singapore and places testing out in the markets where they're going to be potentially most challenging. And the second thing is, and again, I imagine Nick might find this with his organisation, is we quite often find the company culture trumps the country culture.
Okay.
Because they subscribe more to the values of the organisation they work for. For example, the GSK expectations and our values and our mission statement, than they do sometimes towards their country culture. So actually, I don't know how we achieve that, but that we don't tend to find there's a massive problem there in terms of rolling leadership development programs out. Because
so some of the socialisation that has already happened as a result of you choosing to be a GSK employee, in a sense, is already predisposing you towards a particular leadership approach. Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've just come back from our leadership program in New Delhi last weekend. I think our Indian organisation loved that we were authoritative and command and control years ago. We've taken a program to them which is all about becoming a challenging, empowering leader, and you would think that's the antithesis of the culture out there. But Ben, your point is absolutely right. 90% of them just said, wow, I really get this, and I see this as the future of the company. But I have to say about 10% of them were like, actually, no, they really didn't get it. They wanted to stay both in that kind of archetype of command and control, and will find it hard to shift. And it may be that, those are the leaders that need to move on.
Yeah, so I was going to say it was also by and by when you're actually, the leader. It's also a choice of whether this is the fit for you, and that's what you're finding there. So I'm just intrigued that we've got the poll results there, and an overwhelming 80% of you have said that there isn't a robust process for evaluation, and it's interesting. One of the previous slides that you will have seen is also we have an assumption that, and we've started to talk about it here. The notion of what exactly is leadership development, and the idea of sort of 70%, 20%, 10% has been a number that's been bandied around for a while. And in fact, DDI have done some recent research amongst quite a sizable population of 13,000 to actually really ask, so what is happening in practice? And the interesting finding for them was that they actually found that it was more 52, 27, 21 in terms of how much people are actually learning when they're away from, the workplace, and the transferability of that versus, what they're doing on the job. So just as we're, coming towards the end of this conversation, I think what would be, particularly given that quite stark poll response in terms of do we know whether this is working. When you look at the money that you're spending and the clients that you're working with, what would be your, if you like, top tips? If our participants are sitting out there thinking, okay, so what's the one thing I could do differently, or the one or two things I could do differently, which from your experience, do make a difference in terms of sustained improvement in the workplace? So not just the programmes, but the other activities perhaps that you've been involved in.
So it's not the program itself, it's the journey that's around it. So we're moving towards it being seen as 12 months. There happens to be some time that's face-to-face, but most of the time is actually spent in other ways of interacting, and that's how you sustain it. I think we were very fortunate in a way because we managed to get an aha moment for the whole organisation around leadership, which gave us a bit more licence to play with making it stick. But if you hadn't created that, I would just go for that 12-month window where you work at it consistently, but it's not all about big events. It's absolutely about the use of e-learning and other techniques to support people back in the workplace.
Because one of the things that came up in the breakfast session that we ran back in the spring was the sort of metaphor. One of the participants said it's a bit like, taking a fish out of water, cleaning it. But if you put it back into a dirty tank, then it's not going to actually, thrive. So from your point of view, Ben, what else are you doing around cleaning up the tank?
Yeah, it's we haven't got the answer perfectly yet, but my hunch is, and some of the research I've been doing over the past 18 months is it's about capability development. And what I mean by that is the skills to learn other skills. So I think we need to kind of provide leaders with that ability. There was some interesting CEB stuff done recently, Corporate Exec Board, where they were talking about the effectiveness of on-the-job learning. So the research they showed was actually, even though that people were exposed to on-the-job learning opportunities, I think it was 45 or 55% of people actually extracted the learning opportunity from the opportunity they were given. So even though we're exposed to opportunities to learn, we're not necessarily taking advantage of them. So I want to be able to kind of, I guess, make leaders more cognizant of what they should be doing to become better learners, but also then give them the skills and tools to be able to then put that into practice.
So there's a bit of unconscious learning. So
yes.
Stuff's happening, but if asked about that, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that was a learning experience or that was a leadership development activity. I've learned something, but I'm not necessarily equating the two.
Yes.
Is that what okay.
Yeah.
Eve, from your point of view, are there any...
I think if there is a silver bullet, it's going to be coaching. I think all the research shows that whatever learning intervention you do, it's very hard when people get busy for them to have it front of mind. And if there is a discipline around having to check in with someone who'll hold you to account, coaching is the best way to do that. The issue is if it's far too therapeutic, the coaching, and it's not linked to actually what happened in the learning intervention, whatever it was, it can drift off a bit and become sort of general problem solving, troubleshooting, rather than anything to do with raising your game in learning terms. So some of that is about managing that transition extremely carefully from when people have completed whatever it is, e-learning or an event of some kind, and holding them to account consistently over a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you. And that actually, because I know both GSK and BT have invested hugely in your internal coaching capability as well as working with external. So I think that's something that we've seen. Well, that brings us to the end of the webinar. So I'd just like to thank all of you who have participated online and all of the questions, and to the panellists here in the room. What we would like to invite all of you to do is to participate in our leadership survey, which is going to be an ongoing part of the research and will be published in spring. And the details of that will be circulated via email later today or in the next 24 hours, depending on where you are in the globe. So please do look out for that, and we would encourage you to take part of that. Also to say that the live web chat is going to continue. The discussion stays open, and this will be live for the next 3 months. So all of us who've participated will also come online and respond to some of the questions. So thank you for a lively debate from our participants as well, and thank you to everybody here in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.